Welcome to Plato's Cave for our December 14, 2014 broadcast. My name is Doris Motormouth and I am your Poseidon news anchor. CNN, the United Kingdom may seem an unlikely candidate to lead a renewable energy revolution. It doesn't have much sun for solar power, it doesn't have much space for wind power, and it doesn't have giant coursing rivers for hydro. It does, however, have thousands of miles of coastline and a lowering and restless sea whose tides ebb and flow with tremendous force. Energy companies in Scotland and Wales are seeing the potential from underwater turbines which tap a constant and predictable source of energy, are invisible and can produce as much electricity as a conventional wind turbine. If a test project in the fast-flowing marine waters of Pentland Firth in the far north of Scotland goes well, submerged turbines could eventually power as many as 400,000 Scottish homes, according to the Scottish government-backed scheme. Predictable flow. The demonstration array at the moment is 6 megawatts or 4 turbines. Hopefully this will be the catalyst for further investment, MEGen CEO Dan Pearson told CNN. We are looking to complete construction of that in 2016. Seawater is 832 times denser than air, which means the turbines can be smaller while producing a similar amount of energy to a wind turbine. The force of these tides also means the turbines can be placed closer together, taking up less space on the seabed than an equivalent wind farm on land. Apart from being invisible, obviating a factor that has stalled many wind farm projects on land, the marine turbines have the great advantage of tapping an energy source that does not rely on the weather. Other renewables such as wind, wave, solar and even hydroelectricity depend in large part on seasonal and climatic features. Tidal turbines, meanwhile, get 2 regular tide changes a day. We can forecast over the next 100 years pretty accurately. We know when the power's coming, he said. Scrap metal as an anchor. The plan is for the stands for the turbines to be lined up 525 feet, 160 m, apart and weighted to the seabed with scrap metal. With a depth of 130 feet, 40 m, Pearson says that vessels would have a clearance of about 8 meters, plenty, he says, for the small craft that ply the 4-mile region. These are really cut-down versions of wind turbines, such that most of the electrical equipment is on shore so that if something goes wrong, we can get a Land Rover and drive to the substation rather than having to get a boat and pick them up. That's one of the core advantages of this technology. Other issues such as maintenance and corrosion have been solved, in large part, by using the advances in other technologies. It makes use of a large knowledge base. For example, the seals and solutions have been solved by propeller technologies on ships. Problems of corrosion are well known from subsea structures like bridges or oil rigs. What you're seeing is nothing brand new, it's just a lot of components coming together, and I think that's the beauty of it. Safe for sea life. Concerns over the impact on marine life were also raised during the planning process, but Pearson said the simple fact is the turbines move so slowly, at between 12 and 18 rpm, that experts believe most sea life would be able to either ignore or get out of the way of the blades with ease. We've been working closely with institutions such as Scottish Natural Heritage and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds because we have diving birds in the area, Pearson said. We have seals, we have whales, we have dolphins. It's beautiful up there, he said. Undersea monitors have been logging the wildlife in the region over the past 5 years and that various groups now have a clear baseline of which animals populate it. There has been a lot of work done in other parts of the world on how seals and whales interact with these turbines, and they do actually get a bit curious. But these rotations of the blades are quite slow in comparison with wind turbines, and the theory is that they can just get out of the way. He said research had shown that most marine life avoids tidal surges when they are in full flow. I can imagine seals dancing around them, but the only time they'll be playing around them is when the flow is benign, and that only lasts for about an hour and a half, and at that time the blades aren't rotating. We don't want to be blasé about it, but at the same time we have a high degree of confidence. The immediate future of the energy source, he said, was looking good, with leases around Scotland showing the potential to produce 1.2 GW, more than twice the energy produced by an average-sized nuclear power plant. The UK has a good chance to develop and manufacture these turbines for world consumption in a beautiful part of the world which currently has a low GDP, he said. Japan election. Voters back Shinzo Abe as PM wins new term. BBC. Japan's ruling coalition has won a new 2/3 majority in parliamentary elections seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's economic policy. Japanese media reported that Mr. Abe's Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, retained its House of Representatives majority. The LDP will govern with the Buddhist-backed Komeito Party after the party's won 325 seats out of 475. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called the snap vote to secure support for his Abenomics economic reforms. Public broadcaster NHK said the LDP had won 290 seats, with Komeito taking 35. The main opposition party, the Democratic Party of Japan, won 73 seats, an increase of 11, NHK said. No complacency. Mr. Abe was elected in 2012 and has tried to revive the economy by raising public spending and printing money. After an initial burst of growth, Japan slipped back into recession in the second half of this year, which many economists have blamed, at least in part, on an increase in sales tax, from 5% to 8% in April. The tax increase was legislated by the previous government in 2012 to curb Japan's huge public debt, which is the highest among developed nations. Mr. Abe says he called the election to get a mandate to delay a second increase in the tax to 10%, scheduled for 2015. My Abenomics policies are still only halfway done, Mr. Abe said on Sunday, adding that his government would not become complacent. I am aware that there are still a lot of people who are still not feeling the benefits. But it's my duty to bring benefits to those very people, and I believe this election made that clear. Many Japanese were bemused by this election. Most thought it completely unnecessary. Some were angry at the huge waste of money. But Shinzo Abe is nothing if not a canny politician. The turnout may have been a record low, but he got what he needed, a new majority, and 4 more years in power. Why he felt the need is still unclear. Some observers think he has been facing stiff resistance to his economic policies from within his own ranks. A big election win will help him crush that resistance. Others think it a cynical move to lock in 4 more years before his popularity slips further. Whatever the truth, Mr. Abe is now the most powerful prime minister Japan has had in many years. The question now is how will he use that power? He says he is determined to push ahead with difficult and potentially unpopular economic reform. His opponents on the left fear he will use it to push Japan further to the right, to try again to overturn Japan's pacifist constitution, and to further whitewash Japan's historic crimes during World War II. End of the embedded player component. Player embedded. Japan is the 3rd largest economy in the world, according to the World Bank, but it has struggled in recent years. Among his pledges, Mr. Abe vowed to help more Japanese women enter and remain in employment by tightening anti-discrimination laws and setting employment targets. The U.S. hopes Mr. Abe will be able to expand Japan's military role, so that it can play a bigger part in their alliance. That challenge to Japan's constitutional pacifism, traditionally opposed by Komeito, is expected to lead to heated debate in 2015. Voters were choosing who sits in the 475-seat lower house of Japan's parliament, the Diet. Reports said turnout at polling stations was low due to voter apathy and heavy snowfall in parts of the country. The government said turnout was at just 35%, 2 hours before polls closed. Several surveys in recent weeks had pointed to a win for Mr. Abe's party. Observers said this was partly due to the lack of a real political alternative, with the opposition in disarray. What is Abenomics? Shinzo Abe's economic policy, launched in 2013, was so wide-ranging that it was named after him. It was designed to help pull Japan out of 2 decades of deflation and kickstart its stagnant economy. It involved 3 main proposals: printing vast amounts of money to boost Japan's purchase of government bonds, monetary policy, sharply increasing government spending to help spur growth, fiscal stimulus, reforming key sectors such as agriculture, healthcare and energy, structural reform. Economic growth briefly returned, helped by a weaker yen that boosted exporters, but 18 months on, Japan's economy is back in recession, and support for Mr. Abe has been dwindling. Krugman fighting consensus says 2015 Fed rate increase unlikely. Paul Krugman, challenging the consensus of economists and the Federal Reserve's forecasts, said policymakers are unlikely to raise interest rates in 2015 as they struggle to spur inflation amid sluggish global economic growth. When push comes to shove, they are going to look and say, it's a pretty weak world economy out there, we don't see any inflation, and the risk if we raise rates and it turns out we were mistaken is just so huge. The 2008 Nobel laureate said in Dubai, it's certainly a real possibility that they'll go ahead and do it, but probably not, and for what it's worth I and others are trying to bully them into not doing it. Krugman, author of End This Depression Now, has criticized the U.S. government and central bank for not doing more to revive the economy after the financial crisis, and his position now pits him against most Fed officials. Krugman said financial markets are signaling that policymakers will delay raising borrowing costs. His remarks build on arguments he's made in his New York Times column. On December 10 he wrote that the Fed risked letting itself being bullied into doing the wrong thing by raising interest rates prematurely. Yields on 10-year U.S. Treasuries, USGG 10 years, are at the lowest level since mid-2013, and inflation expectations have dropped with the slump in oil prices. The Federal Open Market Committee, which next meets to set rates on December 16 to 17, will take energy costs into account in its assessment of inflation and the economy. Higher rates top Fed officials, including Vice Chairman Stanley Fischer and New York Fed President William C. Dudley, said this month they expect the oil slump to spur domestic consumption, playing down the risk that it could push inflation further below the central bank's 2% goal. Unlike Krugman, Fed officials and economists surveyed by Bloomberg expect higher U.S. rates in 2015. The benchmark federal funds rate will rise to 1.375% by the end of next year, according to the median projection of Fed officials released in September. The median estimate of economists in Bloomberg's latest survey is for a rate of 1% rate at year-end. U.S. unemployment held at a 6-year low of 5.8% last month, and economic growth is forecast to accelerate next year. Yet Krugman and others including HSBC Holdings plc chief economist Stephen King have argued that the recent drop in U.S. unemployment masks low wage growth, suggesting that the economy is still struggling to recover. Depressed economy. There is a very strong case that the United States is still a very depressed economy, Krugman said during a presentation on the state of the world economy at the Arab Strategy Forum in Dubai. While most major central banks view inflation of about 2% as the yardstick for price stability, more than a quarter of the 90 economies monitored by researcher Capital Economics Limited have a rate below 1%, the most since 2009. The outlook for global economic growth may deteriorate in 2015 with risks of crises in China and the euro area, Krugman said, as the European Central Bank fails to dodge deflation and the world's second biggest economy struggles to bolster domestic demand. China's economic growth will probably slow to 7% in 2015, the worst since at least 2007, according to economists' estimates on Bloomberg. The two scary spots are the euro area and China, said Krugman, who also warned of the risk of private sector bankruptcies in Russia amid a slump in the currency. Krugman was a frequent critic of former President George W. Bush over issues from the war in Iraq to tax cuts, and he has also found fault with President Barack Obama and the Fed for not doing more to spur growth. He has repeatedly argued that the $831 billion stimulus package that Obama championed in 2009 was too small and that former Fed Chairman Ben S. Bernanke was too timid. OPEC's Badri, oil's price slide beyond fundamentals. CNBC. The head of OPEC said on Sunday the group had no target price for oil, and urged Gulf states to continue investing in exploration and production, saying the United States would continue to rely on Middle East crude for many years. But Abdullah al-Badri acknowledged that the oil price, which has dominated trade on global financial markets in recent days as it hit a succession of 5-year lows, had fallen further than market fundamentals should have dictated. The comments at an event in Dubai were Badri's first since the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries left its output levels unchanged at a meeting last month. The fundamentals should not lead to this dramatic reduction in price, Badri said in Arabic in remarks made through an English interpreter. OPEC sought a price level that was suitable and satisfactory both for consumers and producers, he said, without specifying a figure. Asked if there was a need for an emergency OPEC meeting before June, Badri smiled and said, "I don't know." Oil's relentless slide pounded energy stocks and currencies exposed to crude exports on Friday, doused appetite for riskier assets and pushed investors into the safety of government debt despite strong U.S. consumer sentiment. Badri said November's decision to leave output unchanged was not aimed at any other oil producer. Some people say this decision was directed at the United States and shale oil. All of this is incorrect. Some also say it was directed at Iran and Russia. This also is incorrect, he said. Brent crude settled at below $62 a barrel on Friday after the World Energy Watchdog forecast even lower prices on weaker demand and larger supplies next year.